Okay, so for week 3, assignment 3, I don't have any specific software to show you or techniques, but what instead I'm going to do is just give you a little lecture where I take some images onto a blank canvas and kind of rearrange them and show you how you create an asymmetrical design and how different aspects of visual weight can affect the balance in an asymmetrical design.
So, a brick on one side and, well, what's the opposite of a brick? A feather, of course. So I just drag that on. Now I have a new layer, a feather layer, and a single brick layer. And I hit enter, I place the file, and it still has the transform controls over it. So now, if you're looking at this, well, is this balanced? It's asymmetrical. It's different on this side than this side, but is it balanced? Well, no, this is heavier, right? Is it because we know it's a brick that it's heavier, or is it for some other reason? Conceptually, we have a contrast. We have contrast in color. We have contrast in shape. But more importantly, visual weight. This is darker than this, so it's heavier. It's also a little bigger. So how can I make this side balanced? One thing I can do is make this one much bigger, change the scale. Okay, what else can I do? Well, I can make this one smaller, or I can change the color. I'll do that really quickly here. So is it closer? Yeah, but I think I still need to change it here. Let's put the transform controls on. Make it even bigger. Okay, what else can I do? I can make this bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, one thing is the direction. Right now, this has got a strong direction, but so does this. That adds visual interest. Anything that adds visual interest makes something appear more dynamic. Well, I don't know if that's going to work. Okay. Well, another thing to make something heavier is the farther it is to the side, the more heavy it appears. So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to move this towards the center. And I'm going to move this one, apply. I'm going to move this one further away. Also, it gets heavier as it gets towards the bottom. So maybe I can do that here. Now we're starting to get a sense of equilibrium. What's equilibrium? Balance. Does this side seem heavier than this side? It almost seems like this is a little heavier than that now, doesn't it? Okay, so you get the idea. What else can we do here to play around with this? Okay, well, let's pull on another feather, because it's easy when you have two things that are the same, or that are different, rather. Okay, so now we have one white feather and one little tiny black feather. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger just so you can see what I'm doing here. So how am I going to get these two to be in balance? Hold Shift to get it transformed. Place, apply, transformation. Get rid of show transform controls. Okay. Yeah, that actually kind of seems a little bit balanced, right? Look, very different in shape. Why is this one balancing out? It's so much darker than that one that helps to balance it out. This has some dynamic things going on here which add a little more visual weight. You know, it's something you kind of have to get a feeling for. Placement has something to do with it, size, direction. Everything affects everything else. So everything you do will affect everything else. Everything. If I change it so that they're oriented the same way, suddenly it changes the balance. Well, went off the top there. Now that doesn't seem to have the same sort of dynamic, compositional elements to it. So anyway, now I have them the same size, they're facing each other, and the only real difference is, well, there's a couple differences, is obviously this one's darker, and it's much heavier visually. But this one has some complexity to it. So what happens if I, just for laughs, throw in a new one here? Now that I have similar size and shape, it's not so unbalanced, right? You might argue that it's a little darker too, but really the thing that's making this seem more in equilibrium is the complexity of this one versus the simplicity of this one. Now, other things that can be done, let's get rid of that one and bring this one back. Again, if I move this out to the side, it starts to get on a little more visual weight. And maybe I'd have to move this one in a little more, up a little higher. You know, you have to play around. Placement is a big thing. And think of it as you have like a little seesaw underneath them with the fulcrum right in the middle. And things get closer to the center, the lighter they are, just like when you're on the seesaw or the teeter-totter. Okay? Now I want to look at some other images. This is one of my favorite paintings by Philip Guston. Now, the reason I choose this painting is because at first glance, well, first of all, I like the painting, and I like Philip Guston, but he is the master of making something seem really simple, and at first glance, it really seems it's asymmetrically balanced, but it just seems off balance, right? Like, it's not equilibrium. There's all these things making this go, like, heavy to this side, and yet it doesn't quite feel unbalanced. Why is that? Several things are going on here. First of all, things that are giving it weight on this side. Obviously, the head, this is titled Head from 1975. The head is more on this side, so that has more visual weight on this side. The eye is looking over this way, which the direction of eye direction or anything that's pointing in a direction tends to give emphasis to that side or that direction, which adds visual weight, which is in my notes. So there's more things over here. You know, it's also a little darker on this side. There's a little more visual interest down here. Everything is making it seem like everything he's doing is heavier on this side. Is there anything happening on this side that adds some visual weight? Well, these little brush strokes help. It's a little pinker over here and a little whiter, which gives the overall sense of this background a little darkness. But the big thing, well, there's two big things. One thing that centralizes things is this ear. It sort of makes a focal point right there. The focal point usually would be the eye, right? But it's not. This is the focal point. Why? One thing, it's very close to the center, but what else is making this the focal point? Well, this eye is also serving as an arrow shape, a wedge-shaped arrow that is pointing us right to that ear, and we can't ignore it. We have to look there. And that helps bring some of the focus back to this direction. Not so much over here, but here, instead of over here. So Philip Guston is the master of playing around with all of these things that we're learning about and trying to get us to move our eyes where he wants them to go and to consider the whole space and yet create a focal point in a less obvious place. So let's look at a print by Hiroshige, a very famous print. You've probably seen it before. A perfect example of asymmetrical balance. But why? How? Everything's over here. All this big weight. You got all this dark blue. You've got all this design, all this interest with these little spiky things that are the waves, these little spots. Everything is giving all of the weight here. And this can lead a little bit into next week. But why does it seem like it's not heavier on this side? Why are we moving over this way? Well, obviously, our eyes are being directed by the motion of the wave. The wave is about to come crashing down over here, so how can we not look over here? And Mount Fuji, right there. Little thing, but not so little. So it's definitely a focal point, right? So, really, our attention is right there in the center, which is not really where we want it. Automatically, this is a default design thing. The default is your attention is always in the center. It's never on the edges. So we do things to try to get you to look at the edge, like swooping up here and boats pointing up there. Now, did Hiroshige know all this consciously? Maybe, maybe not. I haven't studied him enough to know for sure. Design principles are relatively new. This was, 19th century, so maybe, maybe not. A lot of it is intuitive, but he was a great artist. So let's look at another one. And here's another one. Also asymmetrical. Balanced? I don't know. Is it? Does it have equilibrium? Maybe, maybe not. You got all this weight over here and a lot of nothing going on over here. Okay, so maybe you have stuff closer to the bottom here, which helps balance it out. You got the visual interest at the very bottom edge of this stuff, which definitely helps balance it out. But then this little thing here really kind of becomes almost a focal point. Now, these little marks that are put on the prints are part of the tradition of Japanese woodblock printmaking. So, I don't know. Does it get incorporated into the design or not? That's the question I don't know the answer to. Without that, maybe it helps, but I actually think that's part of it. I actually think that in this case, it's not meant to be perfectly balanced, and that, in fact, if you look, the characters, the figures, are all traversing this bridge towards the city, moving from the country to the city. He wants us to be looking over here. This is what this is about. It's about this movement from the left to the right. This whole composition, the whole meaning, everything is about going over to the city. So he wants it to be a little more emphasis over on this side. So that means, you don't always want perfect equilibrium. Sometimes you want to directorize. However, in our class, for this assignment coming up this week, we want equilibrium. We may want a focal point, we may want a little emphasis, but we want a sense of balance. We don't want it to be horribly out of balance. Now, this is not horribly out of balance, but there's definitely emphasis over here. Now, my ego couldn't let me get away without showing some of my own work. So, here's a photograph I took. And I'm very concerned about balance as well. And I think a lot about symmetry. I use symmetry all the time. But I'm also interested in asymmetry, depending on the composition of what I'm photographing. And this is a perfect example of something that I originally thought I wanted a very symmetrical photograph, because I do a lot of that with this boat and this reflection. By the way, this is not symmetry. This reflection is not a perfectly symmetrical reflection. It's just a reflection. Okay, but it's almost symmetrical, right? It's kind of almost in the center. This is kind of balancing that. Maybe it's not. But actually it's very kind of vaguely informal. This is much heavier on this side, and it's balanced out by having more things over here. But really, again, the key is this little point is pointing in this direction, and that really helps to balance it out, if I may say so myself. On the other hand, I don't know if you could say this one has balance. This one, definitely, I want to direct your eye here. It's the go to the light, right? There's the sun. This also has a sense of rhythm with these lines rhythmically going along in this direction, and the way they progress up this way, but also the rhythm of the trees. So this really was about this being an insanely ridiculous focal point all the way in the corner of the composition. It was just what I wanted to do. On the other hand, this is a more traditional asymmetrical balance. Big shape, other big shape, more complex, more simple, slightly off-center to help balance it out. And that's kind of the way it works. Hopefully this is making some sense.